Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Juan Williams, political analyst and author of New Prize for These Eyes, The Rise of America's Second Civil Rights Movement. Juan, thank you so much for joining me.
Brittany, my pleasure. I'm so glad that you invited me. Thank you.
Of course, and the book is excellent. So first, a big congratulations on it. And it follows your previous one, Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years, 1954 to 1965. And you pinpoint the exact moment that you believe the second civil rights movement was born. And we're going to talk about that moment in a second. The 2004 DNC, when Obama took the stage and gave the keynote address. And you note in the book that the two movements can't be compared because the second is not an extension of the first, but rather built off the first movement. So can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Sure, Brittany. Again, thank you so much for inviting me and for reading the book. But almost 40 years ago, 1988, I wrote a book called Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years. It was a companion volume to a PBS series of the same name that was a big hit. And the point there was, as you mentioned in the subtitle of Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years, 1954 to 1965. So that's mid-20th century. Now I've written New Prize for These Eyes, The Rise of America's Second Civil Rights Movement. The first movement, I think, Brittany, could be summarily described or summarized by three words: we shall overcome. Those famous words from a gospel song. The second movement, I think, can also be summarized by three words, and those are Black Lives Matter. So the first movement strategy had a lot to do with marches. The 1963 Great March on Washington, led by Dr. King, is so famous. I think it is part of our American canon. We all know what happened there. It was highly organized, but just think about it. It's 250,000 people. Now, in this second movement with Black Lives Matter, we've had marches way beyond that. I mean, you stop and think about it. We had marches that were thousands of marches with millions of people. The first movement marches were highly organized. The second movement marches are not so organized. They tend to go viral. They're born on the internet. And, the internet is the key mover here in this second movement. So it's the largest movement in U.S. history in terms of the millions of people who've taken to the street and march. But also, I just wanted to hit on this idea of how things going viral matter. So it's like tweets, it's messages, it's video that people take on their cell phones, all showing what it means to be living while Black or Latino, and treated differently, either by the police or in the schools or in housing or a lady at the bird park or whatever. This is a very different movement having very different impact on us as Americans. It's created a lot of confusion even, about, is it legitimate to talk about race or not in this new America? And, is it in a corporate culture? Should it be taken into consideration in terms of hiring or in curriculum in our schools? There's a lot of tumult about this second movement, and that's what I want people to open their eyes to, Brittany, to see that we are involved in something fresh and new, a second civil rights movement.
And you talk about in the book this new style of activism with social media playing such a critical role, but it was born on the stage in 2004 when Obama was giving the keynote address at the DNC. And a little thing about Obama then, he was a little known figure. He was not a national figure, certainly. He was running for Senate in Illinois. But take us there. You were at the convention. You see the 17-minute long speech. I recently rewatched it after I read the passage, and it was a message of hope. It was electric. The crowd went wild. When you were sitting there watching as a reporter, did you understand the gravity of the situation and of those remarks as you were watching them live?
You're embarrassing me, Brittany, because I did. What was interesting was, and I think I wrote about this in the book, when he starts speaking, there's clamor in the room. Nobody really knows who this guy is. He's like a small player. He's a state senator from Illinois. Seems like a nice guy, maybe an up and comer, but he's no Jesse Jackson. He's no known figure. He's not known in the Congress or the Senate, nothing like that. Starts speaking, and then things start to quiet down because there's such a impact. He seems very charming and very forthcoming, and he doesn't speak from black grievance or like I'm upset and America's racist. No, he's talking about being grateful that this is the only country in the world where his story could have happened. And I think it starts to be striking. And then, of course, comes those classic moments when he talks about this is not a white America and a black America. This is America. This is not a gay and straight America. And he goes on and on in this way. It's not a red America and a blue America. This is one America. And people are like inspired and they're like, wow, who is this guy? What is this about? And it immediately opens the door to this conversation about a post-racial America. That, you know what? Maybe we should put in the past all the hurt and pain and guilt and regret and start talking about us as one America post-race. This is a new concept. And of course, it comes to even higher representation when Obama wins the presidency of the United States in 2008.
And the book seems to thread this needle of Obama wanting to be a president, or saying he wants to be a president for all Americans, not just Black America. And you talk about Obama in the book as one of the most misunderstood presidents in modern times. So can you talk to us about that and how it relates to this second civil rights movement?
Sure. So I think when Obama is elected in 2008, we're in the midst of the financial crisis, if you recollect. And he's having to deal with all of that. And then people are like, oh, well, what is Obama going to do? Because he's the first black president of the United States. Well, immediately he saves the major institutions, the banking institutions that were, on the verge of collapse and would have taken the economy down. Then there was pressure. Well, wait a second, what about the average guy? And especially what about, poor people who also have been impacted by this recession? And Obama's like, well, I can only do so much at one time. And then there are all these appeals to Obama when it comes to race. And Obama regularly says, oh no, I'm not the president of Black America. I'm the president of America. I represent us all. And this was his appeal. It's how he won the presidency. And I think he always felt that he was vulnerable to being sort of categorized as just a black guy or just a black president, as opposed to the president of the United States. But his critics, boy, Brittany, the critics came on and they treated him as a black president in some ways. Remember, the Tea Party movement springs up in reaction to his proposal of the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare as it was called then. And they say basically he's trying to give away the world. He's giving away our tax dollars, our insurance policies to the poor. And I think you could read in there to the minorities, to the blacks, the Latinos, the poor people. And it's largely, the Tea Party movement is largely white. And there's this now tension around him. And it's interesting from his perspective, he's trying to be president of all America. But you have the other side saying, no, really he's black and he's really talking to black people. And it leads to this misunderstanding of, well, who is this guy? In a way, he is trying to hide any kind of direct racial affiliation that I'm the black president. And the other side saying, no, we see you as the black president. And he's like, well, but I'm president of the United States. Now, this really hits a button if you stop and think back to that time, Brittany, because one of the things that undercuts him is then the rise of Donald Trump saying, we don't even think that this black guy's an American. He probably was born in Africa or Indonesia or someplace, and it's the so-called birther movement. And again, here's this guy who's trying not to be racial, but he's being put in a racial box. And I think it's very confusing, even to this day, for Americans. He won re-election, still the most popular Democrat. But in terms of politics and race, he is a confusing mix.
And then also at the same time, as your book recollects, is that the Black Lives Matter movement was born in the second term of his presidency. And you're saying that the second civil rights movement could be defined by Black Lives Matter. So can you talk to us about that?
Yes. Again, Brittany, thank you so much for reading the book. You're really well informed. Yes. So if you remember, Trayvon Martin is murdered in 2013. And at the time of that murder, the community volunteer community guard who shoots him says, the kid attacked me. The kid's wearing a hoodie. He looks threatening. He looks thuggish. And then the other side says the kid had just gone to the 7-Eleven and bought some candies, some Skittles, and a tea, I think an iced tea drink or something, and he's coming home. But he looks suspicious to the guard. They get into some confrontation, and Trayvon Martin is shot. The police don't even initially want to, they don't arrest the man who shot him. And then when they do arrest him, and he is prosecuted, the jury finds him not guilty. That leads on the internet, to go back to where our conversation started, people out west, not even in the state of Florida where the murder occurred, saying, that young man's life mattered. And so you get the phrase Black Lives Matter, BLM, and that's going to become the defining phrase of this second civil rights movement.
You say in your book that Donald Trump embodied the backlash of the second civil rights movement. And as we talked about earlier, when he started the birther movement, questioning if President Obama was even born in America, I'm curious, without Obama, is there a Trump presidency?
No. And this goes to so many levels. We go back to Trayvon Martin, and you see right away that the people who are opposed to Obama, when Obama comes forward in Trayvon Martin, and he does so reluctantly, but he says, if I had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon. Well, unlike what we were discussing earlier, where Obama tends to pull away from any racial identification, here's a moment when he did step forward into race. And the immediate reaction from the far right was to say, we are with the police, and we are with the police against the fact that there's a higher crime rate in black communities, and that there is a reason to be suspicious of these thuggish-looking kids in their hoodies and all that. And then that theme is picked up by people like Donald Trump, who lionize the police and say it's unfair to ask the police not to be aggressive with these young blacks, especially young black kids that they view as thuggish. And this goes on. I mean, remember when there's a Harvard professor, Henry Louis Gates, who has a confrontation with a policeman in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That leads to the Rose Garden meeting between Obama, Biden, the policeman, and Gates. And again, the thought is, why does Obama say the police are stupid when he had said that Gates was trying to get into his own home? And so why would a policeman arrest a man trying to get into his own home? But people say, no, Obama was taking the side of the police as opposed to understanding that the police are trying to protect the community. In all these cases, you start to see really a bifurcation. It's like, are you with the Black Lives Matter people, or with these black criminals, or are you with the police? And again, it raises race in a new way. In the first civil rights movement, Brittany, the whole goal was about passing legislation to undo segregation. So you get the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and the whole thing is, we want blacks to have access to full citizenship rights, and of course it's going to help if they can vote and they can elect their own officials, and then their officials will help to protect their rights. The fruition of that movement in some ways is Barack Obama, a black man in the White House. But as you come into the second movement, what you see is people, especially working class to poor black people, saying, yeah, it's incredible, it's unbelievable, a black man in the White House, but what is he doing in terms of our lives? What difference is he making for poor people? He's all the time saying, I am not the black president, I am the president. And what you get then is, in the midst of people on the other side, like Trump, attacking, and it's Obama, in a way, fades away. And I think it creates a lot of tension. And I think, I remember it was my surprise, Brittany, but I remember when Obama was elected, Ebony magazine had a cover and it said, "In my lifetime." This, for so many people, it was like, that's unbelievable. I never thought I'd see a black president. That same publication, then after several young black men are shot and there's problems, and Obama really doesn't react, or he tries to stay out of it. That same magazine, Ebony magazine, was so prominent in the black community, then says they're disappointed in Obama. They say he's not reading the room, that he's not responding as they had hoped he might respond to take the country in a different direction in terms of race relations.
And even in 2024, this summer, you saw people get frustrated with Obama for what they described. Critics have said he's chastising black men, particularly for not voting, for not supporting Kamala Harris before the election. What do you think then Obama's legacy is when it comes to race relations, when it comes to this second civil rights movement?
Well, I think, as you pointed out after reading the book, again, I'm so grateful. My thinking is that the second movement really begins with the speech at the Democratic Convention in 2004, where he talks about one America, and the whole notion of a post-racial America is born. Now, what happens then going forward, especially after he's elected president? Obama never claims to be a post-racial president, but that's the image that people have for him, that he represents this new era. And his reluctance to get involved, his attempt to say, I am just a man, an American, and a man who loves his country and represents all people, it doesn't quite hold up to the challenge that's being presented by people who want to see real change and dramatic change in terms of, income inequality, poor quality housing, poor schooling for minorities in the United States. Then you get the Donald Trump situation, the kind of anger, oh, why are we having to talk about race? Obama and the Democrats are all about identity politics. They're not about you. They're representing the outcast or the poor, the minorities, or the transgender. And this leads into Kamala Harris. And so many would say, I don't know about you, Brittany, but would you say Kamala Harris was in position as the Democratic nominee in 2024 to be kind of an extension, the next Barack Obama? And she tried to say, she didn't talk about the fact that she was a woman, much less the fact that she was a black woman. She too tried to say, I'm an ordinary person, I'm a stable person, and I'm not that guy, not Donald Trump. But it didn't work ultimately. Ultimately, people wanted somebody who was not status quo, but a disruptor, a change agent, and they said that's Donald Trump.
And I want to talk about the summer of 2020 in particular, because there were a few touchstones that summer. As we know, we were in the thick of COVID. People were still in lockdowns. People were upset. People felt trapped. And then you see the killing of George Floyd, Memorial Day weekend of the summer of 2020. That video went viral. And as you said, that new wave of activism. So everyone felt energized, and it felt like Black Lives Matter really, really took off at that moment. And then you see President Joe Biden, at the time he was running for president, and he said before that the catalyst to run for him was the Charlottesville white supremacist rally of 2017. Then he's elected in November of 2020. And now as we sit here today, we are in the last full week of Biden's presidency. So looking at the past 4 years, what do you think his legacy is going to be from the summer of 2020 when Donald Trump was still president to now, and how will the history books remember him?
How will they remember Biden?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, one, this is the Biden's promise when he said he was running to save the soul of America after Charlottesville, as you point out, really was striking the people. And I think he defined Trump at the time as a very divisive force in terms of race relations. If you recall, we were just chatting, you and I, and you said, reading the book, it reminded you of so much that had happened during the Trump presidency. And you think back, and there was Biden saying, yeah, a lot of this stuff is just chaos, and it's divisive, and he's talking rudely about not only blacks, but women, about foreign governments. He's trying to break up American alliances. So on top of that comes kind of the icing on the cake, which is COVID and the whole confusion, and are we being helped or hurt? Trump saying, oh, it's going to go away in a few days. Biden plays on all that. Biden comes in as a stabilizing force after Trump. And then, of course, comes January 6th and a Confederate flag going through the Capitol. Lots of things are going on here. And Biden tries to be, again, not Trump, a stable force. He gets infrastructure done. He gets COVID payments made. He tries to rebuild American alliances overseas. He gets America out of its longest war, but several American soldiers are killed in the process. What happens here is Biden is not a kind of presence, especially on social media, so important to the second movement. He's no way a competition for Donald Trump as a persona, as kind of defining the era. He's kind of doing the business of government, and when it comes to that telling debate performance where he comes up against Trump in the first debate, he just looks lackluster and elderly and not up to the job. And I think that proved a killing blow. And ultimately, it was Joe Biden who decided not to run and open the door for Kamala Harris. But when you ask about the Biden legacy, I think in part right now as we speak, with the Trump inauguration for a second term pending, Biden becomes the guy who said he was going to save the soul of America and then kind of faded. And seems to be a good guy. Nobody is going to be harsh in their criticism of him unless they're his political opponents. But they are going to say, he didn't seem to have the passion, the purpose, the drive to communicate, especially in the new social media sphere, about what he was doing. And it allowed Trump to revive himself as an American persona who is constantly up to something, has something to say about everything. It's like a reality TV show. And that's the Trump show now goes on. And ultimately, in answer to your question, Brittany, how will Biden be remembered? A lot of it has to do with how Trump performs in this second term. Is Biden simply intermission between two Trump terms and Trump is the one who defines this era of American politics and life? Or is it the case that Biden was a stabilizing force, Trump fades away, and we go back to something more like Biden in the future?
I feel like I couldn't have read the book at a better time because a week out rather from Trump's inauguration, I'm being reminded, and the reader will be reminded of every major thing of his presidency, and especially as it relates to race relations. And as you said, Biden won in 2020, saying he was saving the soul of America. Then there was obviously a voter backlash to that because Donald Trump won in 2024. And Trump's 2016 victory, as you point out in the book, was backlash to the second civil rights movement. So what do you think his 2024 victory represents?
Well, I think, again, when you look at Kamala Harris and her appeal was, I'm going to stabilize things. I'm going to be an extension of Joe Biden, an extension of Barack Obama. We're going back to a sense of, oh, America's okay. We're on the right path. We just have to work things out. Versus the disruptor, Donald Trump, who comes in and says, oh, things are terrible. Remember his first inaugural speech, American carnage, this is terrible, there's crime in the streets, the immigrants have broken the border, the economy is in the tank, all that. You look back on that and you think, wow, that's the way he thinks, or is that just a kind of a TV performance? But at this point, it doesn't matter because so many Americans want energy, dynamism, and a number of Americans, I think, want to see the elites taken down. And so there's a lot, that's where the fury is. When I think of Kamala Harris, I think she didn't pick up on that the energy of a second civil rights movement Obama did, because he was seen as cool and thoughtful and the first trailblazer, breaking a glass ceiling. But by Harris refusing to identify with race or with her gender, or even speak in terms of forward-looking visions for where we're going, she was more about the stabilization, while Trump is about, I want change, I'm going to bring out change. So I think if you look back at 2016 and Trump's first win and this win, to me, they're quite similar in that, it's kind of populist movement saying we have the voice, the energy to reshape America, and the other side, Harris, the Democrats, Obama, they just are more of the same. And I think that's where we are.
And sandwiched in between there is 2018 and 2020, where we saw a general cultural repudiation of Donald Trump in the midterms as well as the general election. So will potential backlash from a second Trump term pave the way to a third civil rights movement?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because obviously I'm more a journalist than historian. So, again, thank you so much for taking the time not only to talk with me, but to read the book, because that's what's made this interview so valuable. And, what I do in the book is I tell the story of race relations from a journalist perspective. So you can see, here are the events that define that period. It's not so much my opinion that I think jumps out at you as the telling of the story of this era in terms of race relations. And you now say to me, so Juan, does that mean there's going to be a third movement? And I do think, Brittany, thank you. Yes, you're right. You have the sense of where I was going. There is a third movement dawning. And the question is how and where would it go? Because right now, so many people are discouraged on the Democratic side, on the left side. They say, look, Donald Trump won the election. And what is Donald Trump talking about with regard to race? He's saying, we don't want any of this diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff. We're going to get rid of that. He's saying he doesn't think that we need to have discussions about slavery in the past anymore. He's like a guy who, as his slogan says, make America great again. In a way, he wants to go back to a phase in American life when we didn't have to deal with all this consideration of race, gender, ethnicity, immigrants, when America demographically was overwhelmingly white, when America was black as the largest minority, not Latinos. He wants to go back to an America where he was more comfortable and where much of his base, which is overwhelmingly white, was more comfortable. And I don't know if he will be successful or not. That's why I say I'm more the journalist than the story. I can't tell you. I don't know. That story hasn't happened yet. But I think that for the third movement to be born, it has to react and evolve. And what that means is, I think, figuring out how to win elections against someone like Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again movement. So what does that mean? They got to figure out how to appeal to people, including the overwhelming number of white people who voted for Donald Trump. And they've got to figure out how to appeal to those younger black and Latino men who also, in surprising numbers, voted for Donald Trump, and say to them that there is a left wing or Democratic vision. Maybe it's not left wing, but maybe it's even a moderate vision of what can be for America, where more people feel their needs are being met. But it's got to go in that direction. It's got to find new ways to appeal to people, and we haven't. We'll see where it goes. We haven't seen it yet.
Well, we will definitely see where it goes. And Juan, like I said, this was such a great book, especially at this time, because it goes through the past 20 years in such a great way, laying down different touch points, especially as we head into a second Trump term. So a big congrats on the book. Where can people find it?
Well, of course, you can go online, Amazon or any of the booksellers. Simon & Schuster has a website. Simon & Schuster is the publisher. But your local bookstores, your Barnes and Nobles, and local bookstores. And I By the way, I think there are more now local bookstores. For a while there, they seem to have gone away, especially with the virus. But now, local bookstores are thriving. So please go to your local bookstore.
Juan Williams, thank you so much for joining me.